Hello.
Hello.
We're back.
Yes.
We had to take a break
Yeah.
because there was a lot of haps.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of haps.
The holidays, and then also just all kinds of stuff. My daughter was with us for a while, so we were kind of offline, and we're back.
And we kept sitting down to do this episode, and so one of us would feel off or tired, or we just said, let's take it easy.
Mm-hmm.
And now it feels right. Because whenever we do that, we then end up having conversations about what we're going to talk about, and it always comes more clear.
Mm-hmm.
But the first, I guess, what brought up this conversation and these topics was mainly around, we started talking about narcissism and the concept of narcissism and our different experiences with it. And that kind of led us down this path of seeing how it's connected into, mental health, diagnosis, spiritual attachment, service to self, soul polarization, connection to God, all of this stuff. And so we wrote this down to be a really big gateway into these topics, because the other two things around this are suppressed memories, and us talking about some of the details of our suppressed memories and the process of going through them and continuing to go through finding more suppressed memories that come up, and the nature of psychological operations, and thinking of a psyop in the collective externally, and understanding how that psyop tool and mechanism has been used throughout different time cycles and is used on individuals throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that a lot of people are gonna really gain valuable information from what we're gonna share, because from what I've noticed in my own experience, at least, is that narcissism is so deeply embedded in our society that often people don't even recognize when they are being subjected to narcissistic behavior from other people, because it has become so normalized. And it's like an entire spectrum too. We've established that too when we were talking about it, that it really is a spectrum, because people we all have the potential to sometimes lean into narcissistic behavior, but that does not mean that you therefore have a personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. So it's an entire spectrum. So we are just going to talk about our experiences, about what we have gained from it, about forgiveness, anger, healing, all kinds of stuff.
And then we're going to use an example of something that you guys may be familiar with, this documentary series called Wild Wild Country, about Osho. And we've been watching some of that and seeing how it relates into all of this stuff. So it's a really good example for understanding mind control. And so we're going to kind of bring that into this space. But is there anywhere you want to start specifically?
That when people hear the word narcissism, they immediately think of somebody that is like the typical bully, or somebody that is very full of themselves. And the truth of narcissism is that most narcissists are very charismatic. You are not going to think that they are narcissistic. These people also don't abuse everyone that they come in contact with. They will have specific victims. So other people, they actually gather people around them that are going to become an echo chamber. That's what they do a lot of the time. So that when the victim breaks from the narcissistic trauma bond and starts accusing the narcissist of, you've done this to me, you've done that, and I'm seeing it, they're going to gather all these supporters and say, how dare you say this about me? And all these people are going to come to the narcissist's defense. there's also such a thing as a covert narcissist. And those will be the people that nobody ever suspects, but they are going to be the people that can be like the parent that you kind of dread going to see. The parent that is kind of always competing with you. That is, for example, a covert narcissist. And that is something that happens a lot between women and their daughters. That once the daughters reach a certain age, this behavior starts to come up, and so you may recognize this in the connection with your mother or father, and so narcissism has many different faces, is what I want to say.
Yeah, and relating this to polarization of service to self and neutral / unpolarized, I really see narcissism as being like the gateway drug for service to self, and it's like the entrance point where you start embracing separation rather than being caught in it unconsciously. So to what she's saying, like, I know I have taken this idea of narcissism behavior traits, and then I kind of just would put it on everyone in terms of if they're behaving in a certain way, then like almost that like everyone has narcissistic traits, but that's not necessarily true. And there's a difference between people who have incarnated and are in a state of neutral and unpolarized and are being kind of brought through this space and this spectrum versus someone who recognizes the state of separation and looks at other people and says, I am superior to you, so therefore I get to use you in the way that I deem fit. And so it's like these two kind of entry points to this spectrum, but that spectrum then goes all the way to entire, deity, I can't think of the word, like entities that are large consciousness structures that are enslaving planets, enslaving star systems, and using races to benefit their own agenda, all the way down to an individual who wants to better their life, wants to get more money, wants to get sex, wants to get validation. There can be that service to self, narcissistic, separative agenda embedded within that kind of confusion in an unpolarized and neutralized state. So there are people who are consciously aware of it and choosing it to use it to their advantage. And then there are those who are kind of caught in it. And this is where it gets really nuanced, and the conversation was so interesting because we're born into this planet in a state of separation per se. We forget that we're connected to God, to Source. And so that puts us in this place of feeling separation. But there are still souls and beings within that state who can still feel unity and still see others in unity, well working through imbalanced energy structures through their behavior. To whereas someone who incarnates in this planet and then they fully swing into using others intentionally, that's pulling you to another aspect of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel that while there is a lot of value in how traditional psychology analyzes personality disorders such as narcissism, which is a cluster B personality disorder, such as also borderline, histrionic personality disorder, being a sociopath or a psychopath. Basically, all these personality disorders, they're all cluster B, which means they're all in the same part of the brain, and they are created in the same way. And if you are born as a baby and you are just innocent, because you are all innocent when you are born. Nobody is born evil or a narcissist or whatever. That is just not the case. You are born and you have a soul and you have this soul mission. And if maybe that is your soul mission to choose service to self. But a lot of the times, narcissists or people that are diagnosed with narcissism are victims of being abused and being treated by other narcissists. And in those cases, often it is just the programs that they receive from growing up is then what they start to use as a survival mechanism, because they learn from the people that they are around that if you want to interact with people, if you want to get love from people, you need to control them. Love is control. That's how they see love, because all they've ever seen is, I want love from you, so I'm going to control you. And it is literally that program that they receive when they are little. So it is very difficult for them to then override this with another program if that is the only program that they have ever seen. So you have a few different types of narcissists. Like I said, there's the covert narcissist that doesn't even, they are not aware of the fact that they are doing anything wrong. They think that they are just loving the people that they are around. But the thing is, they don't really know the experience of receiving unconditional love, because this is how they were treated by their parents. Then there is the malignant narcissist, who is very consciously manipulating you. They know exactly what they're doing. It is a strategy. That is what we see often in people that are doing these mind control experiments that you have heard him talk about in his videos. It is these people that are often, that are in these child trafficking situations. It is these people that are doing all these horrible things. Those are the malignant narcissists that are using this to control others and very purposefully doing this. So those are the ones that are definitely choosing this service to self and using narcissism to align with service to self. And then there are the people that are victims of trauma, of abuse, that literally go through a phase where their brain gets damaged. That is what it is, because there are brain scans. When you scan people's brains that have a cluster B personality disorder, there are certain parts of the brain that are just not working anymore because of trauma that keeps on being repeated. And I've done tons of research on this. When I started getting suppressed memories that started coming back, I was trying to understand why this other person was the way that they were. Why? Because I knew that I truly believed when they told me, I do not want to be this way. I could see that in that moment they meant it, but there was something stronger than themselves that was not allowing for them to really change. So I wanted to see what is happening. Why is this not possible for you? And what can I do without constantly trying to people please? And I need to heal too, but I want to understand what's happening for this other person. And so I started diving into all these things, the energetic side of it, the physical side of it, the brain, what happens in the brain, how does this all happen? So basically, I don't know.
So in these other lifetimes where beings have chosen service to self, they've chosen narcissism per se, and then they're coming into this life with that karma attached. The karma doesn't take, it takes I think about 7 or 8 years for it to come online. And so what about in that type of situation? Do you think the person, a soul who's chosen narcissism and service to self in other lives, that comes in with that karma, they have these certain neural pathways that they've chosen, so it's creating a geometry grid. So that's essentially the mental framework. So if they've turned off these things that are associated with the heart and with emotion, lacking empathy, lacking being able to perceive others as themselves, do you think that that means that they're like, because it's this whole nature versus nurture perspective, but we don't take that into the account of the Akashic records. So it's like, if that person has that service to self karma, does that mean they automatically become a narcissist when that karma comes online? And they still have a chance to work through it, but does that mean that they become a narcissist? Is that inevitable that happens?
They chose for their soul mission to choose service to self, is what you're saying.
They have in other lives.
Yes, but is that something that they are also, what, like?
I guess that's a big indicator, because then there are souls that entire soul families that are coming in and continuing to choose service to self.
The funny thing is, this portrait is right in there,
Ellen.
and this is that what we called her?
Is that not what her name was?
No.
Oh.
Anyway, no, but that was the card. You have a card.
Yeah,
that
that's
looks like,
why I thought
but
of that.
That story, that is one of my past lives, and in that past life, the person that basically triggered this whole me diving into the rabbit hole of trauma, healing, post-traumatic stress, understanding personality disorders. I went through the same experience with that person in that lifetime of this portrait. And it is a pattern I have seen for this specific person, and we're going to get into all the details in a little bit, where he chose this pattern over and over, and all the soul family, it's like these pawns that are all in place and they come back in slightly different positions, but they're always kind of the same. And it's like they're all working through the same thing, they're all kind of choosing the same roles. So it almost seems like it's very difficult for them to choose something else, because this is something they've done before and again and again. And in my case, I see that within the interactions with these souls, and I mean, this happened, and I created an entire webinar based on this whole thing because of the insights that I've received about understanding of traumatic soul contracts on a celestial level. Like, why did we choose all these things? What am I learning from this? What are they learning from this? How is this connected to galactic wars? And how are we playing out all of these galactic conflicts here in often family situations? How many of you that are now watching may have been with a person in the past, and now you have children with them, and there's this entire weight on this connection, and you feel it's karmic? Often this comes from lifetimes in the galaxy where all this started.
And it's like, this is such because a main point of our conversation about narcissism when it first came up was, is it an incurable disease? Is it an incurable diagnosis? And so that's where we're finding this spectrum, because then also it's like, we have these service to self soul families that are continuing to choose service to self. That's what this fall has been, the fall of the Melchizedek families, the Metatronic families. All of that has turned into a narcissistic embodiment. So then these soul families keep choosing service to self rather than wanting to choose positivity or even heal their karma. They're actually coming into these lives, setting up these positions to keep perpetuating that spectrum of narcissism, which is at the full furthest end of malignant narcissism. You know what you're doing and you're completely following it and perpetuating it. So it comes down to these nuanced layers of like, it comes down to the individual. And so this idea also of like, is someone incurable or not? It really comes down to time and the quantum field and potentials and probabilities. And so it's like, well, one person may have chosen lifetimes upon lifetimes of narcissism, and they come into this life and they're actually trying to choose through it and heal it. They're going to have a higher probability of working through that than someone who's come in without even keeping that in their like soul potential. And so there's all these levels moving around, but I've really just felt this returning for myself around this idea of diagnosis, and around when I first started getting into mental health, memory, Alzheimer's disease, all of this stuff, schizophrenia. I really started looking into the academic industry, the psychology industry, and this concept of diagnosing and then placing this inevitability around it, not just around this being a part of the life, but then placing an identity around it and putting that person in that label. So it's like we have this really fine line to walk where we need to hold open the truth of potential for people to be able to make changes in their life. But at the same time, it's not our responsibility to make those changes for them. And what was coming up when we first talked about this was, if you would have explained that to someone that you were working with, or when you were going through this,
Yes.
that person had the potential to heal, that would have kept you hooked into the exchange.
Yes. So this is something that is so layered and can be interpreted by each individual almost in whatever they want to hear. And like now he's saying, oh, there's a small chance they can be healed. Somebody that is still fully trauma bonded to a narcissist is only going to remember, oh, they can be healed, I'm going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
If I would have heard that 8 years ago, I would have never left. I would have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very difficult to break free from narcissism when you are being controlled. And a lot of the times, people that are not in a trauma bond have a very hard time understanding how somebody can stay with an abuser, like in a domestic violence situation. The thing is, and I wrote a story on this, and I've had this story for a couple of years, and a handful of people have read this story. And it is about my experience that I went through. And in the story, I go into me going through suppressed memories, my research into the brain, what happens in the brain of a narcissist, what happens in the brain of somebody that is the victim of a narcissist that is in a trauma bond. And what happens is that it is like a very slow brainwashing is what happens. It happens extremely slowly, because obviously if they would immediately introduce all of their true characteristics, you are just gonna leave.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna be like, what is this? I'm not staying with you, you're terrible. Then you're gonna go. But they are first, there's a few different stages. They're going to love bomb you, which means they're going to shower you with affection, compliments, you are the perfect person, all this stuff. And it's going to be unrealistic. It's just going to be unrealistic. Like, of course, we give each other compliments too, but it is in a grounded way. It's not this gushing of love and like love bombing all the time, all day long. That's not what it is. But then once you go through that phase, then there's going to be a phase of devaluation where they're suddenly going to start criticizing you. And it's going to be like in very harsh contrast to the love bombing, that you're kind of going to get shocked. Your brain is literally going to be in shock for a little bit. And yeah, so they're going to be switching between those two, and that's how this trauma bond is created. And what it does in the brain of somebody that is exposed to this behavior is you're going to try to fix the situation, you're going to try to change. Maybe if I did this or this or this, they would not be angry. I did something wrong. And in the end, you are always going to think that the problem is you, because they don't get mad at other people. They only get mad at you. So you must be the problem. So that is, and this is a process that sometimes takes years. This is something that can take years and years to build. Like this whole trauma bond can take years. And then you are in it. And then it is very hard to get out of it. And this can happen between parents and children, between two people that are in a romantic relationship together. It can happen at work with an employer and an employee. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that this can happen.
And like, this is a psychological operation. That's what that is. Using time to slowly bring things in, to make you stop trusting yourself, to make you skeptical of what you're perceiving, to gaslight yourself. That is a psychological operation. So it's almost like narcissism in itself is a psychological operation. Because then when we bring this up to these larger perspectives of these entire galactic type of entities holding this level of service to self, then they're using long, expansive agendas over time, multiple time cycles. So you think of one time cycle as 25,000 years. This consciousness uses many time cycles throughout many different star systems to bring its agenda into fruition. And that's what it looks like. That's what looks like is happening now that we're moving through. And so the nature of psychological operation in a psyop is the narcissistic consciousness coming in and twisting your perception of yourself. Because then from there, over time, it twists more and more and more. And if you're not in a place to say, I'm cutting you out of my life completely, then that's where the psychological operation can stay in place and you still remain in these hooks and these cycles because you're gaslighting yourself into exactly what you just said.
Mm-hmm. And they have specific techniques that they use to make you fully rely on them. They will isolate you from friends and family. They will systematically make you doubt yourself by increasing this contrast between love bombing and criticizing you. And then you are going to go into like a phase of being kind of stunned. Like imagine if I for weeks compliment your hair, or I don't know, I say, oh, you look really good, blah, 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 all this stuff. After a couple of weeks, I suddenly say, I basically twist the story and I'm gonna make him think he's crazy. And I say something like, oh, you still haven't done anything different with that? Like I've been telling you for weeks that you should have done this. And you're like, huh, you've been telling me it looked good. I'm like, what? You're making that up. I never said that. Mm-hmm. That's not at all what I said. I said the complete opposite. And I do that. Suddenly, after 4 weeks of saying all these compliments, I start saying stuff like that. And then after a week, I go back to giving compliments. And then he's going to think that he's the one that cannot be trusted. And then each decision that I'm going to make, he's just going to be like, you decide, because clearly I cannot be trusted. Mm-hmm. And then there also, imagine if I'm going to then say, oh, your friend, blah, 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 that's wrong with them. I don't like you going, like, she doesn't like me, or mm-hmm. he doesn't like me, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So after a while, I am going to be the only source of validation, of love, of anything for him. And for him to feel good about himself, he would need to come to me. That's what a trauma bond is, because I'm the only person that can ever give these compliments. And what happens in the brain is arousal and anxiety are both controlled by the amygdala. And what happens when you are constantly exposed to narcissistic abuse is the amygdala gets inflamed. So this happens. Basically, the amygdala is short-circuiting. It has no idea anymore what to do. So you're going to just trust this other person completely and you're going to be fully in survival mode. Leaving is not an option for you. Thinking logically, oh, I should not be with this person and I should actually do what I want, is simply your brain cannot even reach that other, like that thought is not optional. And that's what a lot of people don't really see. And you don't see it when you see these people out in public. They often seem like perfectly charismatic people. They are friendly to everyone around them, but this is what they may be doing to somebody close to them. Or you may see a victim of narcissistic abuse. You may see a victim, a child that has a handler, like in his case, and they seem like a normal mother-child, nothing going on. And this is an entirely toxic, abusive situation, and you will not see it from the 5 minutes that you see them together in the grocery store. So that's why these things are connected to a larger pattern, to an energetic egregore, an entity that is working through these people. And when these people are born in specific family lines that have soul family karmic cycles, it is very difficult to break free from this narcissistic trait, this personality disorder, because they are surrounded by it often.
Yeah, and like for me, when I first started, I was leading up to uncovering these suppressed memories. There were two people in my life that had these patterns and these traits, and that pattern of me just giving them the benefit of the doubt, looking past it, that was always what I would do. And one of them was Nancy, who was my handler from growing up. I was put through mind control experiments. We'll get into a little bit more details, but there's a lot of details on my YouTube channel. So it's when I decided to actually start looking for red flags within my relationships to see if people actually cared about me the way that they acted they did. And I made that specific intention. And within a few weeks, I had this interaction with Nancy where she was pulling not the love bombing, but the complete opposite side. And she had always been this very love bomber type person. And I got this very strong side of her doing exactly what she just described, making me feel like I was in the wrong for the way she felt, all of this stuff. And so it started, then a few weeks later, it showed me that pattern within this other friend that was in my life who was masking his traits, like masking, even though I knew these were, that he acted like this all the way from like 10 years ago when I used to know him. But the point is that when you start questioning like that and declare that you're not going to allow that in your life anymore, then it starts to show itself, and it starts to show you where you've kept that pattern and held on to it in your life. And so, of course, when suppressed memories come up, it's going to be very, very shocking at first. And I went through an entire process of feeling that level of distrust towards myself, feeling a level of like I was tricking myself, that I was gaslighting myself, all of these different types of things. And the process of uncovering those repressed memories then led me into facing the narcissism that was in my life and confronting it. But it was this entire revealing of where I had basically just given myself to others to allow them to use me.
And then I can continue about that portrait, but they can see it. Okay. They can see it. I think, yes, it's in there. Anyway, that is a past life, and I've talked about that specific past life because that is the lifetime that triggered this entire Kundalini awakening for me. And I've talked about this in a lot of blogs, a lot of videos, but I've always been a psychic child. So I was very clairvoyant always as a child. I was psychic. I was doing psychic readings in high school for my friends. Then I stopped. I didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. I wanted to be normal, fit in, go to college, all this stuff, which was necessary because then I had to be, now looking at it from a higher perspective, I had to make the mistake of finding my ex who would become my abuser. And if I would have trusted my intuition, I obviously would have felt, hey, this is not okay. I needed to make that choice because there was a direct connection to that lifetime where I was a druid and I was a child. And this was often done in the 4th century. This is in Britain. This was often done that children, very psychic children, were placed with specific tribes to be the local tribe seer or druid. So I was basically placed with this tribe to just be this on-demand psychic healer, spiritual consultant from the moment that I was very little. And what I saw was that my ex was then the tribe leader. And basically I had to do all these things. I had to just do all this psychic work for them and I didn't have a choice in it. I was owned by them, basically. And in this lifetime, where was I going with this? I was going somewhere.
Meeting him?
Yes.
Because of...
And so there was this connection already in the Akashic records. And looking back at it now, I see, of course, where I was giving up all of this free will. But this is also looking at it from a higher perspective, a soul contract that I made with him so that I could liberate myself from that program, so that I could choose and align with my higher self to break this trauma bond that has been happening for lifetimes. This is not just a one lifetime thing, and often the people that you find yourself in these traumatic soul contracts with, that now may, in this modern world, it may look like the coworker that you have this very heavy connection with, that is just charged with toxicity. And I say this because one of my best friends had a coworker that was just bullying her. And she saw, and I'm sure she's fine with me sharing this, she saw that this person in another lifetime had her executed and was resentful that she did something wrong, but she was wrongfully blamed for something, and she was imprisoned and executed by this coworker. And in this lifetime, she had to break free from this toxic connection with this other person at the job. And she did. So she then resolved this traumatic soul contract. And so that's what I had to do. So I had to go through this whole experience. And now I can clearly see, when I look back at the choices that I made, or when I was in the trauma bond in this lifetime, how I was not seeing that there was another program that I could choose, that I chose to go through all of this trauma to see the contrast. So what happened is that I basically had to sink so deep into feeling desperate that it was going to be either me killing myself or having some miraculous awakening, which is what happened. And then I saw all the puzzle pieces coming together, and I started researching the ethereal side of it, like how is this all connecting on a soul level. And then, because I wanted to understand all aspects of it, I did dive into the physical side of it, the medical side of it, what is going on in the brain, so that I could understand and for myself put some kind of boundary so that I could safely heal for a while. Because if I would have kept on making excuses for his behavior, not recognizing that in this moment he was suffering from this personality disorder, and I'm saying in this moment because I do see, like Rayan said, everyone has the potential to heal, but they have to choose it fully. But in that moment where I was going through this understanding 7-8 years ago of this is a narcissist, this is what is happening in his brain, I had to fully see him as that. Otherwise, I would have kept this trauma bond alive. I would have kept on feeding this trauma bond by staying codependent, by over-pleasing, by basically losing myself completely. If I thought, oh no, this can be healed, I would have never left. So I had to do this for myself to then heal. And once the first few layers of healing had taken place, then I could look at it again from a higher perspective and see that there was all these different sides to this person. This is not just an evil person. This is a person that has gone through terrible trauma and that has potentially also chosen to align with service to self. But I can also see that there is good in this person and that there is good intention up to a certain extent. So that is where forgiveness comes in, compassion comes in, but also for myself. And I know it's getting long, I'm almost done.
Keep talking.
And the first thing that I went through was also when I saw myself from this now healed point of view. And then I looked back at the version of myself that was fully trapped in the trauma bond. I saw a whole different person, and I almost felt like I was betrayed by myself. Like, how could you do this to me, basically, about myself. And with the suppressed memories, a whole different layer of that came up again, but we'll get into that later because I need to drink some water.
I had to go through the same thing with Nancy too once I found out about the memories, and then when I knew I was going to confront her about it, I had to recognize that I didn't want her in my life, no matter what the outcome of that confrontation was. Because at first there was still this trauma bond that wanted an acknowledgement, a saying sorry, a mending of the relationship. But as I really faced what was happening and stopped minimizing things, I had to get to the space of saying, well, even if she does decide to heal, I don't want her to be a part of my life. And that allowed me to create this boundary that then I put in place this principle of forgiveness, that I wouldn't be having a confrontation with her about it until I reached a state of complete and total unconditional forgiveness around her. And so this has been that process. I confronted her last year in April, so it's coming up on a year. And this has been this process of recognizing all of these different layers that we're talking about. And that also, something that happened with my other friend who was very narcissistic is that I found out he was manipulating me by telling me wrong information about our Akashic records, deliberately like lying about certain things when other things happened. And so I went through this process of then seeing like, okay, well, is he just unaware that this is happening and he's giving me this false information and he's just kind of caught in things? Or like, what's going on here? And that's when I was able to then peer into the higher point of view of the soul. And does the soul actually want to change? Is the soul actually the one that's manipulating me? Or is the body that the soul is in just distorted and getting caught up in things? And ultimately what I realized was that it's actually his soul that is manipulating me. The soul doesn't want to change. And then I started to be able to peer into the soul choices for this life and this incarnations. And that's when I started to be able to see people's polarization of like, oh, this person doesn't even want to change. Mm-hmm. They have chosen to not do that in this life. And when I look at it, they are not going to choose that. And so it's this level of, is the potential there? Yeah, the potential is there for all of them. But if they're not choosing that potential at all, then does it make it an inevitability that they don't heal from those things? And so that's the same thing that happened with Nancy as well, and seeing this higher layer of these almost like narcissistic souls that have chosen service to self, that have then wired these artificial paradigms into their consciousness, and then that's coming through as these narcissistic traits. And it's like this is the psychological operation of me receiving this agenda over time. Like, they were doing things to me when I was a baby that they were then trying to activate when I was 25 years old. So it's like, that's again where this spectrum of narcissism comes in. It's like, I was covered with entities. I had a ton of trauma. I had traits and paradigms that told me I was separate from other people. But in that space, was I actually a narcissist? Because I would say that I was pretty connected with others still, even in that space. But then, if that continues and I don't heal from that, and a catalyst is put in place in the timeline to target that separation, it could shoot me into a timeline of narcissism where that starts running my life.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've gone through in my research when I started looking at the brain scans of traumatized children, of people that have gone through all this stuff. Basically, what happens with a lot of people that are subjected to abuse in their childhood or later, but usually in childhood, is that two things happen, or two things can happen. And it depends now, I think, fully on what your soul is anchored into in the higher realms. If your soul is fully aligned with the God frequency, with service to others, you are, and you have another soul that has been in a pattern, a spiral of being aligned with service to self. And let's say these two souls go through a similar experience of being programmed with a narcissistic program that is then going to be activated later in their relationships with other people in their life. Person A that has chosen to be aligned with service to others, with the God frequency, with love, they are often going to start becoming the people pleasers, the empaths, the ones that are going to become very codependent. And then there are the other ones that are going to basically see the way that they were treated as in this predatory way. They're going to say, this is what I have to do if I want to be successful in life, subconsciously. But this is what the child is then going to integrate and repeat, because they are also aligning on a soul level with service to self, and they're like, well, I want to do this for myself because this is working for them, so I'm now learning how to do this from them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
so it's just so interesting how narcissism and service to self are so intertwined, like so completely intertwined.
mm-hmm.
But I'm looking at this note that says how it feels for talking about suppressed memories. I don't even know how to explain that.
Okay, maybe I can start.
Yeah, you can go.
So some of you will have read my articles. I write about narcissism here and there in connection to the soul contracts, Akashic records, healing, post-traumatic stress, all kinds of stuff, domestic violence mainly, because that's where I come from. Well, that's my background when it comes to suppressed memories, when it comes to trauma healing. And for me, my experience went hand in hand with my spiritual reawakening. And I know on a soul level, me and this other soul, my ex, we made this agreement that that was going to be the catalyst for me to wake up fully and be catapulted into this mission. Because that's what happened. I was catapulted out of my body for like 9 months. I basically had download after download after download in 2017 and 18. And that's not when I had the suppressed memories, but that is when I saw the soul contract very clearly, and I had very clear communications with my ex's higher self. And he was saying, basically feeling terrible about having to do this to me on the highest soul level, where he is in connection with God, and saying, I don't want to do this, but I was thanking him on this soul level for doing this, because now I chose to fully step into overcoming this program, overriding this program that I would have never done if nobody would have ever made me look at this program. And does that mean that we are best friends in this 3D dimension? No, we are not best friends. But it means that I can see why we all orchestrated this on a soul level. So yeah.
Yeah, and like to explain this a little bit more too, like a soul is existing throughout all dimensions simultaneously, so going all the way up through the 12th dimension. So in these dimensions where these souls have incarnated, those are the areas where they've turned off the heart and brought in this artificial consciousness. So, well, the highest aspect of that soul, the oversoul, is at the 12th dimension, incarnated through a line that eventually comes to that point of that incarnation. there are blocks within that dimensional communication because of the karma and the narcissism that's created. You can think of the soul like a brain itself. So there's these patches that have been turned off, that have been hurt and abused, and they create disharmony, or they just stop working entirely. So we can communicate on the oversoul level, where you can see back down on the ground, one aspect of this soul could be choosing positively, another aspect is choosing negatively. But because it all goes up to this oversoul, that one oversoul is choosing both of those incarnations, and it's weaving together the same overall intention of that oversoul, which is alchemy and positive polarization. So this is the way you can see that you're still connected on a soul level and choosing contracts based on this higher dimension of love, while this karma is still working itself through on the lower dimensions. And so how it feels like, I can describe more how it feels now, I think, than the first time it came out. Because the first time these came out, it was like very abrasive, and I felt like my mind was snapping. I didn't trust anything for a few weeks. It was very, very heavy. And so now, though, I can feel when I'm starting to come back to these areas in time where I'm going to be called to more memories. I'm going to have more stuff become aware that I haven't currently been seeing, or that I haven't pieced together. So really what happens for me is I start to notice all of my kind of neuroses around this trauma come up. I start to feel I start to feel very paranoid. Not very paranoid, but I start to feel skeptic, paranoid, and this is that psychological operation. I start to look for things that have to do with the way I experience this trauma. But now I'm able to feel it and I'm able to see it quicker. And even it will start at night when I'm sleeping, and I'll have nights where I'm tossing and turning and sweating. And it's just this feeling of now that I've done it, it feels like my awareness is going further into my unconscious, and it's starting to connect these other dots that I couldn't really tell before. And so I feel like, and there are going to be many more people who realize that they have suppressed memories. And there's, again, going to be a spectrum. It's not going to be everything that I've experienced or that she's experienced, but we suppress these memories for a reason in order to survive. And so understanding that it's how do I say this? We think of this as one of the worst possible things that can happen to us, but it's so possible to get through it. And it's very to the level that I've experienced and that I've been able to move through of it, I am astonished at the way that I'm functioning. And I think that this just shows that this is a process that, again, it's not this incurable thing. There is an ability to actually move through this unknown and get to a place where we can trust why things happened and accept them, in order so we can then move into a state of forgiveness to actually heal the things that have happened.
Mm-hmm. And I realized I started talking and then I didn't go into the actual suppressed memory. But so I was in a state of complete paralysis, basically, while I was in this trauma bond and survival mode. And what happened is that I left this abusive situation in 2018, and I started doing a bunch of healing work from 2018 up until 2022. I was doing all kinds of stuff because I was going through this whole spiritual awakening, starting up this spiritual business, because this was all going hand in hand, this business and me healing from all of this stuff and helping other people to heal. and all of this stuff with the dragons was all going hand in hand. I started working with healers, started working with all kinds of stuff to support my healing journey. And one of the things I started working with too was gumbo. I don't know if you don't know what that is, you can research it, but basically what it does is it promotes neuroplasticity in the brain. So it creates new connections in the brain, where before the brain was damaged or traumatized, it is helping the brain to heal. So that, together with Reiki healing from friends that I was exchanging sessions with, doing my own work, meditating, working with all kinds of traditional trauma techniques to heal all kinds of stuff. All of those things were relaxing my central nervous system. And then in 2018, I had just enough energy to leave the situation. Then I was slowly healing from all of this, and in 2022, I suddenly got exposed to this whole new layer of what I actually escaped. And in my case, that was triggered by all these different healing modalities, all these different things that I was doing to promote my healing. And there was one specific night where I went, and I explained that too in the story that I mentioned before. It was like the night from hell. What happened is, it was like a TV was turned on in my brain, and I kept seeing all these movies of things that I knew that I didn't really know that happened, but I saw this movie that I thought I had already seen, but I'm seeing all these cut scenes that were not shown in the actual movie. That's what you can really compare it with. Like, if you have a favorite movie, or you know this movie completely because you've watched it 10 times already, suddenly there's this uncut version that's 3 times as long with all these hidden scenes that you never knew were there. Mm-hmm. Suddenly that's the movie they're showing you, and you're like, this never happened. I've never seen this before. I've seen this movie 10 times. This was not in it. Suddenly there's all the stuff in it. And there's false scenes that suddenly are not in the movie, that were in the original movie, false memories that they put in you that you remembered to survive. Now that you are no longer in survival mode, now that you've been doing this healing many years later, the amygdala is shrinking, which means it is time for all these memories that were basically compartmentalized, placed in the archive somewhere. They can now start to come up. You can start to slowly process them because this amygdala is not inflamed anymore. It is ready to release all this inflammation. Why is this happening? Why do we suppress these memories? It is literally so that you will not die. Because in my case, like, if I would have fully felt all of it, and in his case, you would have just died from a heart attack because it would be too much adrenaline at once. You would simply die from shock. In a lot of cases where severe abuse happens, that is what would happen if you would be fully present. So your body, what you go through when you start remembering these suppressed memories is you feel betrayed by your own body. You cannot even trust your own body. How could you lie to me? It is 7 years later and now I'm seeing what happened. Why do I not remember? I cannot trust my own brain. I cannot trust my own body. What is this? So that's the thing that you go through. And then you start to see, you did this to basically help me, because if I would have seen this that I went through 8 years later, or so many years later for him, you would simply be broken. You would not survive that. So what happens is your brain is protecting you by making you dissociate in the moment, by making you forget, is what happens basically. And so that's why these suppressed memories happen. And so I started seeing this movie of all kinds of stuff that I didn't remember, of sexual abuse, of just programming, how certain things were said, and how I was seeing the entire program and how I was responding to it, and it was like I was looking at it from a third person perspective. I could see it from this healed perspective that now sees the trauma bond. And back then, all I could do was survive. So that's what I was seeing, and that was what I was going through. So what it feels like to see these suppressed memories again, it is something that suddenly it comes up because your brain is releasing it, it's ready. You are ready to see it now. And you feel angry, you feel, it's like you are reliving all of these things that you could not fully feel 10 years earlier, 20 years earlier. It's like you are that person again. And you feel terrible. You feel like you are back and there's no escaping. And that's what I went through from 8 in the evening until 11 the next morning. And I remember being in my bed then, and it wouldn't stop, going downstairs. All night, I basically spent laying down, sitting up, walking around, trying to move, laying down. Nothing would stop this movie. And I felt like I was going crazy. And it was complete radio silence. There was no guides talking to me. There was nobody. It was clear that it was like, you cannot escape this. You're going to have to see all of this now. It is time for you to remember what actually happened. Mm-hmm. So then I see now how important it was for me to go through that all on my own, because I had nobody with me to help me through that moment. I was all alone. And then I started working with EMDR, which is bilateral stimulation, which is something that helps me when nothing else helps, because in that state, your brain is just seeing this whole film. Meditation, yeah, that's just not gonna work. Trying to do anything, it is just not working because you are in a post-traumatic stress and you just cannot pull yourself out. The only thing that helped was headphones and bilateral sound, because what does that do to the brain? That neutralizes the brain hemispheres, the right and the left brain hemispheres. It is going to bring them into balance by pinging sound from right to left, and your brain is automatically going to calm down, and it's going to focus on harmonizing the two hemispheres in the brain. And that is something that helps me, and I've then started introducing that in my meditations, in any sound healing things that I create for clients, because I had to go through it to then find out the benefits of it. So yeah, okay, back to you.
You explained that really well, of the movie going through the suppressed memories. Mm-hmm. What was I just gonna say? I just lost my train of thought. Let's pause it for a second. All right. So what really helped me with moving through these memories, like she mentioned EMDR, was journaling, actually. I would write out the memories that would come up on paper in front of me. So even if there was inaccuracy around it, that then it would at least get out of my head and get onto paper. And so journaling helped me a lot, and it was just being devoted to my body, because it was a lot of resting, a lot of laying down, a lot of purging and physical purging. I started noticing all of the different areas where my body was just in this state of abuse. And so it was really just sitting with everything that honestly helped the most. And then eventually, once I got to a balanced state, after about like 6 months or so, I think, I started using psychedelics in ceremony more. And so I started setting intention to go into the memories with psychedelics, lay down, listen to music, and the psychedelics would really help me. I would be transported back into these memories. And so the more I was able to work through the forgiveness and get to a state of acceptance and forgiveness, then the more clearly I was actually able to see the things that were going on. And so, for instance, like one of the ways the memories are hidden is they give you, so for my case, it started happening when I was really young. So I grew up with Nancy and other members of my family always repeating these types of narratives and these stories about things that happened in the past. And so, of course, I just believed that that's how they happened. But one of the first memories that I saw was that, so the story is that when I was 6 months old, I all of a sudden busted out into a fever, a really bad fever, and Nancy couldn't figure out what was going on. She had to take me to the hospital so I could get a spinal tap. And when I got this spinal tap, that it was this like traumatizing experience for her, because she had to watch me be bent over and with a needle put in my spine. So that was what I had, was the memory. But what came up was that spinal tap actually happened through a MyLabs experience, which MyLabs is a joint military and extraterrestrial abduction experience. And they intentionally gave me a spinal tap in order to extract this specific fluid out of my spine. And Nancy was in the room watching as it was happening, because she participated in these different experiments. So it was going from thinking Nancy is my biological mother to seeing that happen, and then having to reckon with everything that we just mentioned. Is this true? Am I making this up? Am I being tricked? And so once I was actually able to get to a grounded space after a couple weeks of not feeling like my mind is splitting, and actually accept what was happening, then the process of forgiveness is what laid the way up until this point, all the way up until I was able to have the actual confrontation with her and tell her that I remembered these things. And I didn't come into it asking her if things happened, because that would then be depending on a narcissist and a liar to tell me the truth. So I knew I had to get to a place where I was in complete knowing about what happened, and that I would be confronting around that remembrance rather than asking if this thing happened.
Mm-hmm. And what he said about your body being in this state of abuse. A lot of the time, your body is gonna be holding on to all of these memories, even when your mind does not yet have access to them. So in my case, I was holding a whole lot of tension in my hips, in my shoulders, because, or for instance, I would go into a room, into a restaurant, and immediately I would zero in on the table that was the furthest away from the door, facing the door. I would not choose a table where my back would be facing the door. And it's things like this. But for example, I started doing more yoga. I started doing more stretching exercises. I started introducing all of these exercises. And then you have emotional releases from working with those physical places in your body where you're actually holding trauma. So you may not have the memories, but your body can suddenly release emotions when you start working with the physical places where the memory is being stored. Like my shoulders, I wanted to be invisible basically, so I would make myself smaller. Then I started actually working with stretching my back and making myself bigger again, and emotionally I felt, oh my god, this is not feeling safe, because my survival tactic had always been try to not make him angry, try to be invisible, don't be in the way. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
and I was eventually led to like Pilates. Pilates helped me a lot to move this stuff through my body. And because when it was happening, I was in a partnership at the time, she was teaching me Pilates through the process. And so it was this dynamic of feminine to masculine, and it brought up even more of this stuff that was associated with the memories. And so then eventually I was led to martial arts, and I started doing martial arts. And it was all this process of getting back into my body where I had pulled myself out and allowed that state of trauma to be the default mode network, basically, the primary identity. And so this is what, combined with forgiveness, created the alchemical process for this healing. Because at the same time as you're moving through forgiveness, you're moving your awareness deeper into your body, which is holding the unconscious field throughout all of time, and you're activating on this new layer of perception. So it created this type of rhythm that was, because it was paired with forgiveness, that it was able to anchor into the heart and then allow the mind to actually receive what had happened.
Mm-hmm. And forgiveness is something that even people in the spiritual community, or compassion for the other, this is something that is very challenging for a lot of victims of narcissistic abuse, of domestic violence, of abuse in any way, of being mistreated by another person. A lot of the times people have a very hard time truly forgiving somebody else, because subconsciously they feel that if I forgive you, then I'm betraying myself, then I am letting you get off the hook. And once you see that that is not the way it works, that if you're gonna hold on to this brick, imagine this crystal here, that is like a heavy brick, and this is all this trauma that I had in my shoulders, that I had in my hips, all this stuff, this gigantic weight that's just in my body. And I'm gonna carry it with me like some badge of honor, because I went through this stuff and this is my weight and you did this to me, and I'm gonna remind you and I'm never gonna forgive you. I'm gonna just keep this rock and it's gonna be heavy, but I don't care because I get to remind you of it. They're not gonna care. They're not worried about that at all. They're just going on with their life. And you can forgive somebody without having to be their best friend, without having to make excuses for what they're doing, without having to minimize what you went through. You can acknowledge that what you went through had a very big effect on you and it traumatized you. And at the same time, you can also look at the multidimensionality of everything that took place. You can see how on the human level, yes, now you're working through trauma. You are still recovering maybe from the abuse. You are still healing layers from this abuse. And at the same time, you are seeing why you are going through all these valuable lessons, why you made this contract in the higher realms. You can also see why it is important to have boundaries and not be in communication with this person in the physical. And at the same time, you can forgive them on the higher levels because you can understand why this happened. And this is how you are going to contribute to your healing process.
There's two levels to forgiveness as well. And I fully know that the ability to forgive someone externally comes down to our ability to forgive ourselves. And so that's where this idea comes up then. It's like, oh, well, I've never murdered someone in my life. So obviously, yes, I could forgive myself, but they've done these things. They've murdered someone, they've raped a child. So they still get to be unforgiven. And that is a process of projection. That's saying that if you did those acts that they did, then you deserve to not be forgiven. And this is that next layer of unconditional forgiveness. Because again, we can get into it's like, well, yeah, I can forgive myself. And through the choices that you've made. But when it gets to that extent, you have to then employ this understanding of unconditional forgiveness. Because if you don't, then that's going to remain as this ceiling and as this block that you may heal certain things. You may be able to get more, get more in tune with yourself, love yourself a little bit more. But that ceiling is always going to be there. And so if there is this idea that you could do something that you then are not forgiven for, that's placing you in a state of judgment, and that's getting you to look at someone and decide whether or not they're worthy of forgiveness or not. And so this is so difficult because of these experiences we've had with eons of narcissism and eons of these beings taking advantage of other beings. And so it gets difficult for us to think that like we're just saying, oh, it's okay that they did this stuff. But that's not what it means. And you can feel rage, you can feel anger, you can feel a sense of wanting vengeance per se, but you have to recognize all of that and realize that that's not the basis of what unconditional forgiveness means. And while you hold boundaries, you hold a very clear distinction of, this stuff always comes up with men as well. It's like, oh, forgiveness, you're just going to allow someone to do anything to you and then forgive them, or that means that you just stand back. Well, it's okay that they do these other things. What would you do if they were trying to hurt your family? It's like, well, no, like there's very clear distinction around how to act in certain moments. And that moment is going to call you to it through your intuition. But holding the baseline of forgiveness is how you get into the heart, plain and simple. And if you're not holding unconditional forgiveness, then you're still not operating on unconditional love. Because if there can't be a level of forgiveness in your perception of love, that's not unconditional love. It's conditions. And so relationships are conditional, but love is not. Did I say that right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Relationships are conditional. Love is unconditional. You can love someone from a distance. You can say, oh, well, that person, they might have a potential to heal, but they get to figure that out on their own. I get to stay over here. They stay over there. And I love you. I recognize you as a divine being, but I'm holding you accountable to what you have done. And that is the boundary that I hold. And that's really the only way to be able to get to true forgiveness as well. Because if you think you have to do things in obligation just because you're forgiving someone, then that's not what true forgiveness is.
Mm-hmm. And that immediately brings me to this article that I posted on my blog a couple of weeks ago, I think, or a week and a half ago. And it's all about having compassion while also having boundaries. It's not, you can have compassion for someone and at the same time not let them just trample over your boundaries. And so you can see them for the fractal of Mother, Father, God that they are, while recognizing that you are better off not having them physically be a part of your life. And you do not necessarily then have this need for revenge. You don't wish them any harm, or you don't condone their actions. You can forgive them and then have trust in the outcome of things. Because the thing is, like what he was just saying, like men or women, I think people, more men probably more so than women, are like, have this need for revenge. They want to get even if something bad happened. And that comes from a place of feeling separated from justice, feeling separated from love, from God, from source energy, and feeling like they can somehow get even or get more justice by then seeing that other person pay for the bad things that they've done to them. So they are not going to forgive. But if you work on healing yourself on all these multidimensional layers, you're automatically going to find your healing through the connection to God. You're then not going to need these other people. They may never tell you in this physical life that they are sorry. If you are going to wait for a narcissist to tell you and genuinely mean that they are sorry, you can be waiting until the day that you die. And you are going to waste your life. You are going to forgive by forgiving yourself, by connecting to the God that is up there and within you and in the other person through your own connection to God. And it is through this connection that you know and have faith that if this other person is not ever going to see what they actually did to you in this physical life, then you have the faith that when they die, they are going to see this for themselves. And you're not like waiting, oh, they're gonna see one day. No, you are like just knowing that on a soul level, they are going to then see why they did the things that they did. Because this is an insight that I got actually yesterday. The people that want the most revenge, that hate, that are truly like have hate for somebody else, this actually comes from loving this other person so much that they just want them to see the light. I want you to be better. I want you to see now what you did so that you can grow and heal. Because the person that really doesn't care and is unbothered, like intense emotions, somebody that is really hating somebody, that is putting so much intention in, I'm not going to forgive you, they're actually subconsciously doing this because they think that is going to help speed up this process of this other person seeing the light. So subconsciously, you actually love this other person. You're not going to like hearing that, but that's true. Anything else?
I haven't thought of it this way before, but forgiveness, unconditional forgiveness is the highest form of self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if you're forgiving another or forgiving yourself, but holding unconditional forgiveness, specifically towards another, actually indicates the highest form of self-compassion.
Yes.
I like that a lot. I'm going to be talking about that more.
That is a good one.
And specifically forgiving another.
Yes.
So forgiving another is the highest form of self-compassion.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. And everyone, I feel, has different experiences. You may not necessarily have gone through a domestic violence situation or mind control experiments or whatever those things, but you definitely can think of one example where you feel like you were treated wrongfully, like by somebody that did something to you that you see was wrong, that you are still angry about, that you feel you didn't deserve. So if you now see what you learned from that experience and connect with that other person on a higher level, ask yourself if this rage or anger or resentment that you may feel, if that is actually helping you. And it doesn't mean be best friends with them, go message them on Facebook and say, hey, do you want to go get coffee? That's not what this means. Because I definitely have a few people in my life where I have had to go through deep forgiveness with for the things that they have done to me that were definitely not okay, that were definitely anchored in service to self and definitely not in the service of the other people or children involved. So I have forgiven these people. I'm not going to be friends, but I can definitely see the light in them and the God fractal that they are. So try to do this for yourself. And you're just going to feel way better. And the stone that you have inside of you, it's going to evaporate.
Mm-hmm. And that's the basis of psychological operation. What you said, you're still seeing them as a fractal of God.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's taken away, then that's the entrance into narcissism.
Yes.
That's the entrance into separation.
'Cause then,
that specific thing right there, the denial of the divine, that is narcissism. And through like psychological operations, you know, we see psyops and especially things happening right now with this intention to confuse, to distort, to create events that then influence the collective mind. And we don't have to get too much into this at the end of this episode, but just using this Wild Wild Country as an example. So if you haven't seen Wild Wild Country, it's a documentary series on Netflix. It's about Osho, who I don't think he's still alive. I could be wrong about that.
He died in prison, I think. Wasn't it that?
I'm not sure.
I think
Maybe we should look it up. Oh, my phone's up there.
He died? I believe he died.
I don't know what happened with Osho.
I can quickly
look it up. Look it up. Well, this is a podcast. We can do that. Look her up. Let me know. But it's this documentary series with Osho, who Osho was this guru in India. And he started basically a Kundalini practice of his own and ended up garnering this cult essentially, and then moving them over into the United States and having this whole face-off with the DA and the Department of Homeland Security, and this whole standoff that happened because what their organization was trying to do. But the thing that we were watching in the beginning,
should I read it?
Yeah, what happened to him?
Okay, it says at age 58, Rajneesh died at January 19th, 1990 at the ashram in Pune, India. The official cause of death was heart failure, but a statement released by his commune said that he died because living in the body had become a hell after an alleged poisoning in U.S. jails.
Interesting. Whoa, that's interesting.
Yes, so that's what happened.
So when we were watching this at the beginning, we were just seeing, they're showing the beginning stages and how there's these people going to India and finding this ashram, and then they basically become just sucked into this whirlwind of this new age cult essentially. And we were just observing the tactics used for the mind control and for the hypnosis, and through Osho's presence and through what's happening behind Osho's presence. And so like just seeing this level of mass hypnosis like through Kundalini, and using the Kundalini to open people up and create this sense of glamour and glamorization. And I could see from the beginning that Osho was under a spell himself, that there was MK Ultra going on with him behind the scenes, that he'd basically been primed to hold this role from covert global governments, like covert Indian families and covert Russian families specifically. And so just seeing how this new age cult type perspective is coming up so much more currently, and finding this distinction to see how people act and their energy and the tools that they use to kind of make people feel enamored by them.
And it's the love bombing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And it's exactly what that is. Basically, in the spirit, in the New Age community, there's a thing that Dr. Robert Gilbert, who is a Rosicrucian scholar, calls it Luciferian inflation. What is that? It means all these upper chakras get bombarded with information, with love, with light, with all this fun stuff. But it's not being anchored in. You are being dissociated from your body. You're being cut off from grounding in, from fully feeling these things in your body. And intuition is fully fine-tuned and anchored in by taking it into the body, grounding it into the planet. And your body is a part of the planet. If it all stays here, people can hijack you completely, can overwrite you completely, because you're not fully tuning in intuitively to what you are receiving. So that is basically what happens in these cult societies too. It's an overactivation of all these upper chakras, and you get like the stereotypically like the frazzled psychics that are just like ooh, constantly getting downloads. They're very ungrounded, and that is kind of what you see in this documentary. A lot of these people are just completely floating.
It's like a forced kundalini awakening and opening. So then, because your presence is only up here, even if you're going down into the heart, you're still not going down into those bottom 3 chakras. And this was one of the things when I was learning through this Vedic lineage that I then ended up finding out that this guru was a negative reptilian. They always said, we don't work on the lower chakras.
Which is
and I was like, what? What does that even mean? Like, you don't focus on the lower chakras. And so that's this space of being able to create false light through this hypnosis of this energy. Because as Osho enters these rooms, he has this hypnotic energy about him. Like, you think of Charles Manson. It's through this charismatic, narcissistic consciousness that then comes in and is just creating a funnel of siphoning energy coming to him. And so then there's even these scenes where Osho's speaking to this large group and he's doing these things with his hands over the group. And you can tell that he's using specific magic spell casting words and doing this thing with his hands over the heads of the group. And so this was when we were talking a lot about psychic abilities, and that not meaning that someone's connected with God through those psychic abilities. That a lot of these narcissists, a lot of this, even the full spectrum of narcissism, that consciousness, it's very aware. It's very psychically aware, and it knows how to find cracks. It knows how to find weaknesses. And that's why when we get hit with narcissistic attacks, a lot of times it comes through many different people at one time, and it hits all these different angles of all the stuff we feel about ourselves. And it's like, well, how did they know to say that about me? Like, how did someone know to say that about me? And it's because the consciousness is psychic. It is tuned in to you, but because it's not connecting that heart to the lower chakras, then it's just bombing your upper chakras. I've never really noticed that the hypnosis like that is through love bombing too, because when he walks in, that's when the woman, his secretary or whatever, they immediately think they fall in love. And it's like she looks into his eyes and it's like this
trauma bond.
And it's like it's the same exact thing that happens with Charles Manson. Same exact thing.
Yeah. And a lot of the times these narcissistic people have this charismatic aura. They have this sort of aura. And yeah, so up until now in this podcast, we've talked about narcissism on a private level, like in your personal life. But when you look at politicians, not all of them, I'm just saying a lot of politicians, a lot of very public figures, celebrities, may have been raised in narcissistic situations, may have become narcissists, may have been programmed through elite organizations to become narcissistic, or somehow they operate this way because they have learned how to manipulate large masses of people and twist things in their favor, and it's called what is the word for it again? It's basically a mask that they have. It's the narcissistic mask that they have. And we're starting to see, for instance, now in Hollywood, all these people are kind of falling off of their pedestals. And no, he's not a doctor. He's just a therapist. Richard Grannon is his name, but he couldn't be a doctor because he's just really good at what he does. What he calls this downfall of the narcissist, he calls it narcissistic mortification. So we see this with Osho as well, the downfall of this whole cult. And that is the worst thing that can happen to a narcissist, because they are so separated from true God consciousness. They need to get their validation from everyone around them. When that gets cut off, you literally starve them from their source. And that is the process where they start self-destructing. They start literally self-destructing because they have no other way to get anything. So that is the downfall, and that's when they start to show their true colors. So yeah, back to this whole documentary.
Well, like I was gonna say, what do you feel the difference is now compared to when it was happening in those days with Osho? Because like we look at this happening now and we're like, oh, well, that's completely fucking obvious. Like we would have caught that, because it's like it was old school tactics.
Yes.
Almost. So now we have all of these people in the New Age community that are able to mask it even more.
Oh, that's what I was gonna say.
So
Thanks
how do you feel like that relates in being able to discern how that's happening currently?
Yes, because that's the whole thing. Thanks very much. So I did a video a couple of months ago. You can find it still on Instagram. I'm wearing a sweater and glasses, and it's very unprepared. I'm in the backyard and I'm just rambling at 7 in the morning. And I had this insight where I had to share about being psychic, and how being psychic is not synonymous for being in alignment with God. You can be perfectly psychic and not be in alignment with God. And that means that you can tune into other people perfectly and choose to not align with the God frequency. That you're basically service to self, but very psychic. And you can also be very aligned with God and not necessarily have any psychic abilities activated. I definitely believe everyone can be psychic. It's just our natural state of being. You can be perfectly in alignment and a good person and want to serve others and not necessarily be psychic. And then in the New Age community, if you look at the world in general, there is this hijacking or infiltration of service to self in politics, in education, in the medical field. Why would you think that in the light worker / New Age community there would not be this infiltration, and that every single YouTube creator, Instagram creator, light worker, psychic, tarot reader, healer that you see online and that is very psychic? Why would you automatically assume that therefore they must be in alignment with God? So that also means if you feel, you watch my videos and you're like, I don't feel you're for me, that's fine. You don't have to be, because I want to empower you. He wants to empower you to feel what is in alignment for you. But sometimes we make the mistake of looking at the experts. We look at the doctors in the medical field. We look at the attorneys that know everything. We look at the teachers in our schools. We look at the psychics online or in the spiritual community that have all the followers, that have a large fancy platform, that just look fancy, that look put together, that look like they know what they're doing. But then you can sometimes hear from people that have worked with these individuals that they had very bad experiences. So that proves, that's basically the modern version of this Osho story. There are several larger psychics, healers, whatever out there that have a very big influence today on people. And that does not necessarily mean that they are in alignment with the God frequency, that it is healthy for you to be taking what they are saying as the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for me, an indicator is someone really playing a character. Like now I can just see so quickly when someone is playing this script, wanting to play this personality to suck you in, to make you think certain things about them. And I notice this aspect of the voice and the way that they speak. And there's this really charismatic sense. It's like I'm watching someone act in a movie. Like it's like I'm watching someone who has memorized how to say these things so they can say it in this perfect way to make you feel this specific emotion. And a lot of times there isn't really like organic rhythm to the way that they're talking. It's very, very clear, very, very charismatic. And this doesn't mean that everyone who talks like this is a narcissist, but this is the pattern that I've noticed. And when I'm able to push past this idea of them using all these keywords, having all these followers, having this type of presentation, I'm actually able to see, oh wow, they're operating off of essentially a script that is just reusing and recycling all of these terms in order to make people look at them a specific way and trigger specific types of reactions and thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And I said that too in that video that I recorded, which is something that I cannot repeat enough. Like, I need to repeat this constantly. When you are newly awakening, spiritually awakening, you are often this super bright flashlight that is being turned on. All these psychic gifts are suddenly turned on. You are this wide open, just bubble of light. So you are then going to be looking for the truth. You're going to be looking on YouTube. You're going to be going on all these social media platforms, looking at all these, watching videos, listening to podcasts, reading all these blogs. You want to find out as much as you can about this whole spiritual awakening stuff because it's happening to you. And there are so many different people saying so many different things, and you don't really know what to believe anymore. So you're going to go with the person that seems like they're the most confident, like they know what they're talking about, because you're still in this state of not being very confident in yourself because you're newly awakening to all this information. So the few things that I would say that you should pay attention to is your body. How does your body respond to this person that you are listening to? Are they saying something that is making you feel like you want to kind of not be in your body? You want to dissociate. It's not making you feel comfortable, and it is not empowering you. Listen to how your body is responding to the people whose content you are absorbing, is what I would say.
Yeah, and sometimes you're not going to realize someone was this way until you're looking back and reflecting on things. Like, I was that guy that she's talking about when I was so open, just wanted to learn everything, wanted to devote myself to mentors and all of this stuff. And the first ever physical spiritual community interaction I ever had was through essentially a narcissistic scam. I wouldn't know if it's a word scam, but it was all about money. And I didn't realize this until after the experience, but narcissists get off on being able to help you in your life. They then take this identity factor out of it and think, oh, well, I did this for them. And so that's why it's so important for them to also be on your good side and to help you, because they get off on that type of stuff. And so when I was in this spiritual community with this guy, do I mention his name? Did I mention his name? His name was Ryan Blair. And I signed up for this mentorship weekend, ended up flying out to LA. It was at his house in the Hollywood Hills, and it was like frazzle and dazzling us, like have us up at this hotel that's next to the hills, picking us up in these super nice cars, these convertibles, taking us up on the hills, like really creating this like very Hollywood sense of what was going on. And while I was there, for the next full day, I had some beautiful experiences. They asked me to come back afterwards as part of this only certain people who we feel are at this level are coming back into this group. Do you want to pay more to have an extension for the rest of this year and join this group? So I was like, yeah, of course. And I ended up paying another like $10,000, and then it wasn't what they said whatsoever. We were basically just getting on Zoom and listening to this guy talk about himself the entire time. And so I created relationships from that experience that helped me awaken more. And while I was that person that was like so open, I had to go through that experience to really understand this sense of charisma and being dazzled with favors, with doing things for you and making it feel like this whole glamorous process. And something on here that's making me think of something that I haven't been able to articulate before is like in this wild, wild country, we started seeing how they're wearing the same color, this orange and red color. And this is making me think of, so one, they're pulling people into their upper chakras, not bringing them into the lower chakras. And then orange and red are the two lowest chakras. So that's magnifying and amplifying energy from those chakras for the people who are wearing it. So it's creating more forced kundalini, more leakage of energy. But what I was thinking how this corresponds into just other relationships too, not at this mass level, but like narcissists getting off on doing things for you, like I just said. And I haven't been able to say it that way, but like, for instance, Nancy always used to buy me clothes. And it was like part of this control mechanism that she was getting me something that I was then wearing. Mm-hmm. And she then sees that as this like, you know, she's eating it up. Mm-hmm. And so then when you even stop doing those types of things, that's when the narcissist will turn and show you that the other side that you mentioned.
Yes, definitely. And what I was going to say also is that, of course, most people now, when they first have this spiritual awakening, the first confrontations, interactions with people in this whole New Age community is going to be online. It's going to be through the digital world. And I believe that I have a little bit of an advantage so that I can now recognize online when something is kind of like a fancy facade, because my mom raised me in a very spiritual way, basically. She had her own awakening. She taught me how to channel. When I was a teenager, I started going to all these psychic and spiritual events, lectures by other psychics, book signings, all these psychic events, classes, in-person classes, and I was always the youngest person there. I was 16, 17, 18 years old, and I was the youngest there. And I remember very vividly that on my own, I went to this large event with all these psychics and healers, and they all had their own little like stand or their little booth, and there was a room where they were doing lectures, and there was like a few famous psychics at the time that were one after the other doing lectures. And I was sitting there, and because I was only 16 at the time, I was 16, and this lady was up there, and she was this really fancy, flashy like lady with like her own little background stuff and all kinds of stuff. And I had admired this lady. I had read articles, books, all this stuff. I'm like, oh my God, this is my idol, or like an example back then for me. And I saw her on the stage, and all I saw was this glamour and a lot of stuff caked on top of the fact that she was playing a character to distract us from the fact that she was just playing this character. And I saw through it. And I'm like, you are not what I thought you were. And I was only 16. So I was like, but everyone seems to like what she's saying. Why does it feel wrong? And now looking back at that experience, I can clearly see how I was seeing through the bullshit, basically. And so what I'm trying to say is, if you feel this way about anyone in person, online, trust your inner gut feeling. If something feels off, if you feel like they have all kinds of extra stuff going on to distract you, then they probably are.
And glamour is the best word, I think, to describe that feeling. And you also have to remember, though, that you can create glamour towards someone without them doing it in this type of case. Like, I think of someone like Aubrey Marcus. When I first started his community, I saw a lot of glamour around him. And well, he has blind spots just like all of us and is working through it. He's very grounded out of all the people in the public spectrum. I'd say he's very grounded. He's very he's in integrity. And so it took me a while to actually work through that glamour, because it was this sense that I was projecting this. And this is exactly what happens with the Osho type of situation, is like that glamour, it's this, the solution is the same thing, the same solution to the narcissist. It's that you're perceiving yourself as separate from that being, and you're perceiving that being as being the source of the stuff you're experiencing. And you're not seeing that being as God. You're not seeing the wisdom that's coming through them as God itself coming through to resonate with you because you're in resonance. You're seeing this person that is charismatic, that has all these followers, all this attention, dresses cool, says these cool things, like looks cool, all this stuff. And that is completely dazzling and taking away from the truth, which is that is God too. And there is also a form of astral glamour. Like, I would say that that glamour we just talked about, it comes from the astral field, but there can also be glamour within the astral field that's enamoring you and luring you in and pulling you in without someone necessarily being overly charismatic or overly playing that part. So it's coming back to the body, like you said as well, and feeling that feeling and knowing that that feeling doesn't mean every single time that that person is being a narcissist towards you or has negative intentions, but that feeling is always indicating artificial consciousness that can lead to narcissism and being basically a victim in an enslavement pattern.
Okay.
I think we covered it.
Yes, because we could do a whole podcast episode on the spiritual community.
Yeah, maybe that's where we'll go next.
Yep.
That was great though.
So if you have any experiences that people want to share with us,
please share with us.
If you would like to work with us on this, there are a whole bunch of different ways that we can do this. He has sessions where he can help you through some of this trauma. I have a webinar called Celestial Understanding of Traumatic Soul Contracts that you can listen to, watch, to understand the layeredness, the multidimensionality of these soul contracts. We just have a whole bunch of different stuff.
We just announced a channeling course that we're doing together, a 5-week group container where we're going into the depth of channeling, how to clear, attune your psychic self, all the good stuff. So you can find that at the link in both of our bios. And she just also released a children's book.
Yes, it's not really for sale yet, but I have it, and I have done a giveaway, so a few people have it already. But if you're interested in it, definitely let me know, because then I can get started on officially putting it up for sale. And it's about dragons.
That's weird.
Why?
Why is it about dragons?
What do you mean?
I'm joking. Not a good joke.
Because everything I do is about dragons.
I know, that's why I was joking about it.
So, yeah, if you want to share more, what did this bring up in you listening to this? Are you maybe recognizing patterns in your life where before you did not realize you were exposed to narcissistic behavior, or that you may have suppressed memories that are wanting to resurface, that are starting to resurface, and you would like assistance with that? We have stuff that we offer together. We have stuff that we offer individually. So yeah, reach out, and there will be more information in the description on how to do that.
All right.
Okay.
That wraps it. Love you all.
We will see you again soon.